Joining me right now is Georgia Senator, member of the Senate Budget, Banking, Armed Services, and Agricultural Committees, David Perdue. Senator, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
So what do you want to see out of Kim Jong-un? I mean, the president talks a lot about his relationship, and as you just heard, they have a relationship. But when it comes down to it, we haven't seen denuclearization. That's what we need to see. Do you think we're going to get at least a list of the nuclear sites in North Korea or something that gives the president maybe he did move the ball in this meeting?
Oh, absolutely. I think we'll get some concrete progress out of this summit, but I'm proud of the president. He's acting like a statesman. Even this morning, you see in his comments this morning you just played, he's acting more of a statesman, and I think that's what we need in this conversation. I was just over there last year. I think that we need to see a timetable, though, with quantitative, measurable results, and I think we'll get some of that coming out of this summit. Let's remember, though, where we were just a couple years ago. I mean, we were facing a nuclear threat from North Korea. Now we're in here doing it diplomatically. And I give the president a lot of credit for initiating this and driving us forward with Chairman Kim.
Well, I think you make a good point, because when all of this first started, remember when the president first took office, there was words of fight and fury. Remember that, the fight and fury comments, where he was calling him Rocket Man. The relationship is completely different. But will he actually take that next step and give us a list of the nuclear sites, give us something to quantitatively check in terms of inspections?
Well, let's remember the sanctions are really working. I mean, I was there. We saw refugees coming across the border. We talked to people personally who were in North Korea, and the sanctions are working. Look, the president's offering an olive branch here to North Korea to rejoin the community of nations. We think that Chairman Kim sees that as a possibility to bring his economic wherewithal to a new level, and frankly, they've got to do it. People are really hurting in North Korea, and I think that at the end of the day, Chairman Kim will give us some concrete progress. He wants to survive as a leader of North Korea, and to do that, I think we have to work this out.
So would you be willing to endorse an embassy in North Korea should you get the right results? I mean, what would be an olive branch that the U.S. gives to North Korea short of removing those sanctions?
Well, before we talk about an embassy, I mean, we can talk about a lot of things, of reducing sanctions to a degree, giving economic incentives and aid, but we've got to see concrete progress. This is not something that we want to invest in and then look at results. I think we have to see some concrete results coming out of this summit, and I think we will. There are a lot of things that we can do to tweak this and move forward, but we really need to see progress.
All right, Senator, let me move on to Jay Powell. The chairman is headed back to Capitol Hill today to testify in front of the House Financial Services Committee after speaking with you and your colleagues at the Senate Banking Committee yesterday. Tell me what struck you yesterday about your conversation and about your questions to the chairman of the Fed.
Maria, I never thought, and when I ran for the Senate, that we'd be sitting here today in 2019 talking about socialism in our country, but that's what this topic is. The left is not using the word anymore. They figured out what that will do, but now they're talking about things like MMT, and well, let's let Congress spend as much money as they want, build up as much debt as we want, and it'll all be okay because the Fed can take care of it. You know that I'm concerned about our national debt. $22 trillion it ticked over just 3 weeks ago, and more importantly than that, we have 4 central banks, China, Japan, U.S., and Europe, have historic high values on their balance sheets, and this really concerns me. What the chairman said yesterday is comforting to some degree. He said that's not their business, but at the same time, I think fiscal policy is Congress's business. Monetary policy, for the most part, is the Fed's business. And frankly, I get a little concerned when I hear people on the left talking about Congress doing both.
Yeah, I want to get back to what Jay Powell said in a minute, but let me ask you about what your solution is. I mean, are you concerned enough about the debt to rein in spending? You and your colleagues have been really out there spending and spending and spending more. When is it going to stop?
Well, Maroon, let's talk about what type of spending is going on. First of all, we're spending about the same amount right now in the discretionary budget that we did in 2009. So that's been taken care of. We spent money in the military, which was necessary, and we spent money in this tax bill, which, by the way, the CBO says if we grow the economy just half a point, GDP growth, that we more than pay for. We're growing over 100 basis points, which means we've lowered the debt curve over the next decade by $3 trillion. Now, that's just the first step. We've got to get at Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, pension benefits for federal employees, and the interest on the debt, which, by the way, is the biggest increase in our spending, is the interest on the debt with these 9 Fed fund increases over the last 2 years. We talked about yesterday with the chairman. This is my big concern. We've added $450 billion of new interest, Maria.
Yeah. And I was happy to see the subject come up. Here's what the chairman said yesterday in your testimony and in your hearing yesterday, rather.
The U.S. federal government is on an unsustainable fiscal path, by which is meant that that debt as a percentage of GDP is growing, and now growing sharply, growing quickly, faster, and that is unsustainable by definition.
So you introduced a resolution in both the Senate and the House to address this growing national debt issue, $22 trillion. What kind of reception have you had?
Well, this is the United States Congress. These are people who want to get reelected up here, and spending money is the best way to do that. That's our sin. I mean, that's the temptation everybody has. But here's the problem, Maria. Our problem is in mandatory spending, not in discretionary spending. We've been able to control that for the most part over the last 4 years. The problem is in mandatory, and I believe that we've got to address Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Frankly, those trust funds, the two trust funds I'm concerned about, Medicare and Social Security, go to zero. The trust funds go to zero in 8 and 12 years respectively. We've got to save those programs, frankly, and that will, in addition, long-term give us a plan to get out of here and lower this debt. I think the other thing is health care costs. We've spent a decade talking about health care insurance. We've really now got to talk about the drivers of health care costs. Those are the two big areas left to work on, I think, Maria.
Yeah, and yet, even with all of these expenses that you just laid out, your colleagues are talking about a super expensive new Green Deal. The American Action Forum estimates that this Green Deal, introduced by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, could cost the United States $94 trillion to implement. You talked about the cost and interest rates with Jay Powell yesterday. Here's what he said about that.
Under this landscape, it's proposed the Fed would keep interest rates artificially low, and that fiscal policy would then be driven by Congress and would theoretically manage the business cycle. What obstacles do you anticipate in seeing that, and how successful has fiscal policy been in terms of managing either inflation or interest rates?
The idea that deficits don't matter for countries that can borrow in their own currency, I think, is just wrong. I think U.S. debt is fairly high at a level of GDP, and much more importantly than that, it's growing faster than GDP, fairly significantly faster. We're going to have to either spend less or raise more revenue.
So how do your colleagues have the nerve to introduce something that's going to cost $94 trillion when you've already got $22 trillion that you're staring down?
Maria, let's put that in perspective. Last year, we only collected $2.2 trillion of federal income tax, and these people want to spend $9 trillion a year to do whatever it is they think they're going to do. And oh, by the way, ask those people how they actually came to Washington this week to vote. They got on an airplane, right? In their mode, in their vision of the world, they would not be able to do that. My point is, this is silly. This is not, there's no way this can work. And not even some degree of that can work. We've got a serious crisis right now. We spend $4.4 trillion. We've got $1 trillion shortfall every single year. And we know what's driving it. It's the mandatory side of the equation. Look, there's no easy way out of you. You can't cut your way out. You can't spend your way out. You can't save your way out. We have got to get at the basic drivers of this debt crisis, and we know where they are.
So when do you expect to get at that, at the mandatory issues?
Well, we plan to put a bill before Congress. There are bills out here now. The president knows this is the next step. He believes, though, that it's a political hot potato right now, but I honestly believe it could be the high ground for the Republican Party in 2020 if we were to show the world what we really believe in, and that is economic opportunity for everybody really works, limited government really works. Look at the economic results we're getting right now from pulling back on regulations, lowering taxes, going after energy, and, oh, by the way, pulling back on Dodd-Frank for our small banks. We've released $6 trillion that can now come back into this economy, Maria. This is really substantial turnaround.
Big issues. Senator, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Senator David Perdue there. Be sure to join us tomorrow morning, 5 a.m.